One of the things that language learners look for to help advance their listening skills are podcasts. In my opinion, if you can, you should always try to aim for not just finding some kind of podcast to listen to, but find something that is going to do something else for you. So if you happen to work in the entertainment industry, then I have 5 podcasts that I would like to recommend for you if you're learning English. Hey, I'm Devin with Banter English, and I'm going to give you my 5 recommendations for podcasts you should listen to if you are an English language learner who works in the entertainment industry. Now, why did I pick this specific combination of things? Well, that is what I personally work on. I am an English language coach, and I specialize in working with people who are in the entertainment industry or in other creative fields. I typically recommend listening to podcasts for intermediate and advanced level learners, but if you are a beginner, it can't hurt to at least drop in. I do recommend trying to find something within your industry, and the reason is because you're not only going to be working on your English listening skills, but you're going to be getting some new information that may be able to help you in your career. If nothing else, you're going to be up to date on global trends, news, and information on those things. So why podcasts specifically? Well, it follows this idea called comprehensible input. There are different ways to get comprehensible input. Podcasts are not the only one. But the idea of comprehensible input is that you are taking in some kind of information that is roughly at your level, maybe a little bit higher. Now that can be kind of hard to determine, especially if you aren't really sure what your true conversational English level is. As we all know, just because you can pass an English exam doesn't really mean that you're a fully fluent, fully proficient speaker of English. And so that conversational English level may be quite different, especially when it comes to listening and speaking. What comprehensible input can do, if you choose the right materials, is it does give you more of that exposure to a more natural and relevant type of speech that you may be able to not just work on hearing, but also be able to use for your shadowing practice and anything like that. So I chose these specific podcasts because I wanted to present a fairly wide variety of topics, but also a wide variety of perspectives. So I hope that as we go through, you will find something that not only could help you in your career, but maybe actually is kind of interesting to you as well. All right, here we go. So the first one I want to talk about today is called Trial by Content. This show has a ton of episodes, so there are a lot for you to choose from. The reason I chose Trial by Content is because it does cover a very broad amount of the entertainment industry. So it's not just music, it's not just movies. It even goes into a little bit celebrity culture and things like that. But what I found specifically interesting about Trial by Content is kind of there in its name, trial. A trial, of course, is when something is being judged or determined. We think of the word trial most often when there's been some sort of illegal act and they're going to court. And that time in court is trial. It's the trial to determine if the person is innocent or guilty. In this case, with Trial by Content, it's not about innocent or guilty. It's more just about, did it achieve the thing it was supposed to achieve? Was this movie any good? Was this television show worth being rebooted? Things like that. And that means that the entire nature of the podcast is to bring on multiple different voices who are going to disagree. I think this is incredibly helpful in your career because it will give you a broad amount of feedback. One thing that can hurt people when they are trying to get information in English is they tend to maybe just pick one source or some very similar sources. And so that means that you really only have one view of a situation. It can be helpful even if you find you don't agree with someone else, especially when it comes to just opinions of things in entertainment. It can be helpful to at least hear someone else's point of view so that when you come across it in your actual work, you'll understand, you'll already know at least a little bit about where they're coming from. So I think trial by content is a great option for that reason. It's just a lot of different perspectives, for the most part, about quite a few different topics. For number 2, I picked a sort of interesting one called the Pop Culture Preservation Society. The reason I picked this one is because it is going into some of the history of pop culture. A lot of modern podcasts are talking about modern, recent, very current events, and that is very important. But when you're learning a new language, especially when you're learning English and there's all this cultural nuance, it can actually be kind of hard to understand certain things simply because you don't understand the cultural relevance to that. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but there's always going to be that thing. You're watching a TV show and they make a joke and you're like, I understood those words, but I did not get why that was funny. It's possibly because it was a cultural joke or had something to do with a moment in history or pop culture, something along those lines. So I think it's very interesting that the Pop Culture Preservation Society podcast goes through and discusses things from the past. Most of them seem to be in the 70s to 80s because that is the ladies who run the podcasts were children, teens, young adults, kind of through that 70s, 80s-ish era. They do touch on some 90s as well, but a lot of that really built the pop culture that we have today, especially now that we're getting into all of these like retro sounds and disco this and all these reboots and all that kind of stuff. It can be helpful to hear from the experience of people who experienced it the first time around. Definitely worth checking out. The third podcast that I'm choosing is called Dear Culture. And I wanted to pick this podcast because, again, it does touch on a variety of different types of topics in terms of entertainment. So it's not strictly any particular form of entertainment, but it views this broad world of entertainment through the Black perspective. The guy who runs the podcast is named Panama Jackson, and he brings on these different people who just give a new perspective. Some of them are celebrities that you would recognize. Some of them are people who are incredibly influential, but you maybe don't necessarily know their names, especially from a global audience. You may not be as familiar with their name, but you are probably familiar with their work. One example is one that I listened to where he brought in Byron Allen, who on one hand is known as a pretty prolific comic, but he also is kind of a big, industry. I don't even know if I would call it influencer because influencer still seems like such a small word compared to what he does. He owns different companies and different ways for the Black community to be able to share their story rather than, just limiting it to what is okay from people outside of the community. And it was a really great interview just to hear about that progression of Black people within the industry and how it has changed and grown and how it goes up and how it goes down. They talk about waves of popularity and that sort of thing often. So I would really check that out because there is so much about modern pop culture, particularly in music, that is completely informed by the Black and African American experience. But that is not, it's being talked about more often, I think, than it has in the past. But it's still, again, especially to global audiences, is kind of, it just doesn't come up very often. So I think this would be very much worth checking out. I think you'll realize there are things you didn't even know. Didn't even know were connected at all. Highly recommend. Okay, my last two are going to be a little more industry specific. So it's not just entertainment in general. But number 4 is a podcast called Switched on Pop. So in this case, it is a music-focused podcast. What I really like about it is that it digs into the sound and the historical context of music in a way that is similar but also quite different from Pop Culture Preservation Society. With that one, that was strictly about the past, and in Switched on Pop, they're just going to mention things that are relevant. But what I love is that they really dig into the music itself. So it's not necessarily about, who is Ed Sheeran as a person, unless that's relevant to the music. I did listen to one recently about the role Lady Gaga plays in the Latinx community. And so there is pieces of that that's about Lady Gaga as a person, but most of it is going through her history of music and how over and over for several different pieces, several different times in her career, she has really referenced Latinx culture, community, music, has worked with Latinx producers and things like that. And just the ways that she has cultivated, intentionally or unintentionally, they don't know. Lady Gaga is not on there to confirm or deny. It implies that it's intentional, but either way, intentional or unintentionally, has cultivated a very large and very loyal Latinx fan base. And they talk about that through the music that she makes. So not about, interviews that she gives or, movies that she's in or anything like that. It's not about anything else that she does except the actual music that she makes. It's incredibly interesting. And honestly, I just love to listen to this because it makes me feel smarter about music, which I love. It's popular for me. And number 5 is actually the only podcast that I've somewhat listened to over a long period of time. I'm not actually a podcast person, so I had to really do research for this. I hadn't heard of any of the rest of these podcasts until I did this research, except this one. I have not listened to all of them. I'm way behind, and I just kind of pick here and there, but I have been listening for a few years. It is a podcast called Scriptnotes. I hesitated about talking about this one because it is so specific, and it seems like it's only going to appeal to a very small amount of people. The podcast is from 2 active screenwriters in Hollywood who are just talking about screenwriting. As the tagline is something like, it's about screenwriting and things that are interesting to screenwriters. So I hesitated because I thought, how many screenwriters are gonna care, are gonna be watching this? But the things that they talk about do focus on the screenwriting, but they do still give you a lot of information about the process of filmmaking, about the role of films, about the role of the artist, of the writer in films. Films, especially in Hollywood, are just such a behemoth, what I would call it, just this corporate giant type thing, that there's so many people that come into it and so many things that need to be yes and no and da. I like that they really break that down into focusing on the artists and the artist's struggle in the film industry. They do also talk about other things kind of around there. I think it could still be something that could be beneficial to anyone who's involved in the film industry, even if you're not a writer, or if you just enjoy films and would like to know more about how they come about. That one, again, is called Scriptnotes, and I definitely recommend it. So I said there were going to be 5, and I do mean 5, but I did want to throw in a bonus. And I count this as a bonus instead of a number 6 because it's not strictly entertainment based. But I don't know if I'll create another video on podcasts, so I just wanted to throw this in because I think it could be interesting, definitely for advanced language learners. You could try to listen to it. You could listen to it as an intermediate learner. I don't know how interesting it's going to be. I think you could understand it. I just don't know how interesting it would be. It is a podcast called Lingthusiasm. So it's a combination of linguistics and enthusiasm. And it is these 2 women who do get very enthusiastic about linguistics. So they talk about they kind of nitpick and go into the history of the English language. Why is it the way it is? What's kind of weird about it? What's the history of this? A lot of this that once you get to a certain level of comfort, of fluency and proficiency in English, but you feel like you aren't quite as far as you would like to be, this could be an interesting way for you to fill in some of those blanks in a way that you don't require. You do not need to listen to this podcast in order to be able to speak English, but it's going to give you that advanced look into the uniqueness of the English language. So I wanted to include it because it's very interesting to listen. And I did also have one honorable mention that I probably could have included as a number 6, but it's still very new. So I can't quite say with certainty exactly the types of topics that it's going to bring up and how relevant it will or will not be. But it's new, so there are not a lot of episodes. So if you're someone who gets overwhelmed by too many choices, I recommend this one. It is called Into It. It's a new podcast from Vulture, who does a lot of pop culture things in general. And it's pretty entertaining. It's another that covers a lot of different subjects within entertainment industry, so films and music and TV. And there's an entire episode just on Kim Kardashian. There's a lot of that, and I think it's a very engaging podcast with just a lot going for it. But it's pretty new, so time will tell how helpful I think it could be for an English language learner. Okay, those are my recommendations. I hope you give a couple of these a shot. Try an episode here or there, and let me know what you think. Really try to listen not just for the language, but for the information. And on the flip side, don't just listen to the information, listen for the language. It can be tricky to do that at the same time, but try to keep that in mind as you go forward. And I think it will really help you be more comfortable with your English while also helping you be more prepared for your career or the career you would like to enter. Okay, if you have any questions or thoughts, or if you listen to one of these and you love it, or you hate it, or you have questions about them, definitely let me know. I would love to hear about it. Okay, talk to you next time.